Happy Epiphany! As we celebrate this end of the Christmas season, we celebrate the gift of the wise men. And as we celebrate this, we continue to celebrate with our lights, our greenery, and all those things that, in my opinion, make Christmas a little weird. Now, I've been accused of being a bit of a Grinch on this, and it's not that I don't like Christmas, but don't you find it a bit odd that we go out and cut down a tree and bring it into our house and plant it in the stand for a couple weeks? Isn't it a little weird that we put up all these extra lights as our electric bill goes up and up and up? As we make extra food, and we eat, and we eat, and we eat. I guess that gives Jim something to do in January as everybody realizes they can't fit in their clothes again, so they get a gym membership, right? It is a bit weird, though, the way that we celebrate. And we even give each other's gifts, right? And as we give the gift, we put it in a nice pretty bag, or we wrap it up and put a bow on it and make it look just beautiful so somebody can just tear it apart to get at what's inside. Christmas is a bit weird. But it kind of started that way, didn't it? Because as we looked at that first Christmas on Christmas Eve, we were reminded that Joseph and Mary made a 97-mile journey on foot or donkey, and they didn't have a place to stay. And then as the angels announced Jesus' birth, they didn't go to the rulers, they didn't go to the authorities, they didn't even go to the church, the temple. They went to the shepherds. Shepherds who were outcasts. Shepherds who weren't allowed in many towns. Shepherds whose testimony was not accepted in a court of law. Weird, isn't it? How those were the first people to hear of the birth of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the birth of Jesus himself. And the weirdness doesn't stop there. As we celebrate Epiphany Day, Epiphany, the root word in Greek is epiphania. It means disclosure, manifestation, unveiling, or appearance. So we have the manifestation, the disclosure, the appearance, the unveiling of God in the flesh. And who gets to come see Jesus? Magi. We call them wise men, we call them kings. They probably weren't kings. And wise men, well, you can kind of figure that one out if you want to, because Magi actually were Zoroastrian priests from Persia. That's modern-day Iran. Before Persia, it was Babylon. And so, they may have been descendants of the Jews that were in captivity in Babylon when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were there. And so there may be some influence that has stayed for 600 years that has led them to see the star and come worship Jesus. But they were priests of a completely other religion, of potentially a completely other nationality. And as Zoroastrian priests, they were scholars, which is where we get the wise men inference. They were scientists. They interpreted dreams. They were both astronomers and astrologers and fortune tellers. These folks are the ones who came to see Jesus next. Interesting that God would reach out across the sand to gather these magi. Not only do we sometimes call them kings, we sometimes say there are three because they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and there may have been three. There may have been four. It may have been a dozen of them that they went in on these gifts together. We really don't know. But what we do know is that they saw this star in the sky, they looked in their books, and they said, oh, a star like that means a new king of the Jews had been born. And so they saddled up their camels, grabbed some gold, frankincense, and myrrh to bring as gifts fit for a king, and traveled 400 miles to Jerusalem. Now, why did they go to Jerusalem? Well, that's the palace, right? That's where the king is. That's where King Herod was. And as they went there, they fulfilled this prophecy from Numbers that says, "A star shall come forth out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." As we heard earlier from Isaiah, we're reminded, "For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will be seen upon you, and nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." And it may be this reference to kings that makes us think, well, maybe the Magi were kings. But they were from another nation. And they did come to see Jesus. And they came with their camels. "A multitude of camels shall cover you, the young camels of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall bring good news, the praises of the Lord." That's not the first time that camels loaded down with goods came to the king of the Jews, as King Solomon was greeted with a camel parade of all sorts of expensive jewels by the Queen of Sheba. But we see these camels then coming with the wise men to Jerusalem, to the palace, because that's where kings are born. And in that palace at that time was King Herod. Herod the Great. Herod the Great was appointed to be the king of the Jews by the Roman Senate. Isn't that a ringing endorsement? Yeah, he was appointed by the Senate to be the king of the Jews in 40 BC. He didn't really assume that kingship until 37 BC because there was another king of the Jews around. The Parthians, who preceded the Romans, who were the Romans' enemies, put a guy named Antoninus II on the throne. And so King Herod had to get rid of him. And so Herod worked with Mark Antony to overthrow the king of the Jews, and then Herod was installed then in 37 BC as king. And he ruled till 4 BC when he passed away, which is why we date Jesus' birth somewhere between like 5 and 7 BC. And so Herod was there. He was on the throne, and Herod's throne was marked by loyalty to Rome. They put him in office, right? They gave him this authority. It was marked by that massive building project, taking the Second Temple and making it bigger and bigger and better. It was marked by violence, by strife, by family issues. Because any time one of Herod's offspring might appear to threaten his rule as king, he would have them executed and removed. So how do you think Herod responded when these magi show up wanting to meet the new king? They say a king has been born. Let's go back to Matthew. Where is he who has been born king of the Jews, the magi say? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Now, another interesting fact about Herod, he may not have even been Jewish. He may have been an Idumean. Who are the Idumeans? Well, they go back to the Edomites, which go back to Esau, Jacob's brother, where the Jewish people, the Israelites, descended from Jacob. And so you have this king who is not quite up on his Judaism, on his Hebrew religion. And so he assembles his scholars to say, where is the king born? Because he didn't know. And at the same time, he is troubled. He is a little upset. He's a little anxious because there might be somebody trying to take his throne. And all of Jerusalem was troubled with him because they knew what would happen when Herod got anxious, when he got upset. There was going to be unrest. There was going to be strife. There was going to be trouble. And who knows how that would spill over into the community. And so the priests locate that prophecy from Micah chapter 5 that says that he will rise up from the clan of David. He will rise up in Bethlehem in Judea. And so Herod sends the Magi to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." Right. Yeah, that wasn't Herod's intent. I do find it interesting that Herod did not go with the Magi, because Jerusalem to Bethlehem is not that far. It is only about a 6 or 7 mile trek. That's like walking from here to Pearl Street and back. Okay? That's how far Jerusalem and Bethlehem were apart from each other. But Herod doesn't go. Nobody from Jerusalem goes. None of the scribes or the priests go. Just these Magi, these Persians, these people who are of another faith tradition. They are the ones who go. And so what do the Magi do? Well, as we're recorded in Matthew, as they go into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, and being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Good thing part of their job as Magi was dream interpretation, right? Because they got routed a different way home. But as they come and they find Jesus, they find him in a house. They don't find him in a stable, in a manger. They find him in a home. And we know from Matthew, the star appeared 2 years prior. How long it took them to get packed up and travel, we don't know. But the star appeared and led them. And as they entered the house, they bowed down and they worshipped Jesus. And they unwrapped Jesus' presents for him. Because they opened the gifts, it says. That would be a new tradition, right? We can just open everybody else's gifts. And so they came and worshipped him. Weird, isn't it? Weird that God appears to shepherds. Weird that Jesus is born in a stable and placed in a manger. Weird that the Magi appear to be the next people that come to worship him. And yet here we are. So where is Jesus? We know the Magi eventually found him in Bethlehem. We know that because of Herod's temper and Herod's anxiety, that Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt for a time, while Herod lashed out at the babies in Bethlehem. We know that Jesus grew up in Nazareth, that he wandered around the countryside there, teaching and performing miracles and rattling the cages of the religious elite, and that he died on a cross outside Jerusalem. But we're not here because of where Jesus was. We're here because of where Jesus wasn't. Because when the disciples went to the tomb, when the women went to the tomb early in the morning, they expected to find what? They expected to find Jesus. But he wasn't there because he had risen. It's the resurrection that makes all the difference for us. As we gather here as God's people, we celebrate again the weirdness of a God who is born, who lives, who dies, and then who comes back to life again. And that is the gift that we celebrate. As we celebrate the gift of life with God forever. As Jesus came to die for the sins of the people, to save us from our sins. And as he continues to walk with us as Emmanuel, God with us. And so in the midst of the weirdness of Christmas, we look around and we see the weird people who are gathered here today. And that's all of us, by the way. We're all just a little different. And part of that is because we're all followers of Jesus. Followers of this baby who was born to die, who came back to life again. And so as we celebrate the wise men coming from a far distance from the east, 400 miles to come worship Jesus. We worship him still. And so I leave you with this question. Who are some other weird people you know that God wants to call to worship Jesus? Continue to think about people in your circles, in your friendship groups. Continue to pray for opportunities to reach out with the love of Christ and to share the hope that we have, this gift that we celebrate this season and all year round. Amen. Next week, we kick off a new series, Words for 2020. And with that, I'm going to give you a way to potentially find some people to connect with. One of my favorite questions to ask people in January is, what are your goals for the year? Do you set New Year's resolutions? Amazingly, a lot of people do this. And if they don't set a goal, they pick a word, which is what we're doing. We're going to go through some different words for 2020, and maybe one of these will resonate with you as a word that can frame your year. But one of the interesting things that I find among people who are churched, people who used to be churched, and people who have never been churched is one resolution that pops up. Inevitably, people want to read through the Bible. So, I give you one thing. If you find somebody who wants to read through the Bible, offer to do it with them, and encourage them to do one of two things. Encourage them to start with one of the Gospels. Genesis is brutal. Exodus gets a little bit maybe better, and then you end up, at Leviticus at some point, and you go, what in the world is this? And that's what people typically fall off, okay? So if they start with the Gospels and start maybe with the New Testament, that might be helpful, or there are reading plans online that people can find. I believe Bible Gateway has them. I use an app called YouVersion. It's like YouTube, Y-O-U, but it says YouVersion. And they have reading plans on there. It's a free app that people can tap into for a reading plan. But as you ask, hey, New Year's resolutions, you're picking a word for the year, you can say that, well, we're looking at words for the year for the next few weeks as we kick off this season. And might be a question to follow up with anybody you brought here for Christmas Eve, or anybody that you tried to invite that said, maybe now's not the time. So I give you that as well.